You have 30 minutes to leave, Suzanne said coldly, tossing a black trash bag at my feet. This house belongs to the family now. You were just the wife. Rain hammered against the windows of what had been my home for 17 years. The sound mixed with my heartbeat, creating a rhythm of disbelief that pounded in my ears. Gregory clutched my hand, his 15-year-old fingers trembling against mine as his grandmother's words cut through the air like shards of glass. Grandma, what are you doing? Gregory's voice cracked, still hoarse from crying at his father's funeral. This is our house. Mom lives here. Suzanne's cold blue eyes, so different from Alonzo's warm brown ones, fixed on her grandson with the same disdain she'd always reserved for me. Not anymore, child. This house has been in the Washington family for 30 years. It belongs to the Blood family now. Geraldine emerged from the kitchen, her arms full of family photos. My wedding pictures, Gregory's baby photos, 17 years of memories. She dumped them into another trash bag with casual cruelty. Sorry, Cheryl. Business is business. You should have thought about this before you married into money. Before I married into money? The words escaped before I could stop them. I was 19 when I met Alonzo. I didn't even know he had money. Of course you didn't. Suzanne's voice dripped with sarcasm. Poor little Cheryl working at the coffee shop, barely making ends meet. What a coincidence that you fell in love with the richest bachelor in town. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Gregory looked up at me, confusion and hurt written across his face. He had Alonzo's eyes, Alonzo's stubborn chin, but right now he looked so young, so lost. What's happening? Where are we supposed to go? I squeezed his hand tighter as thunder crashed overhead. Through the rain-streaked windows, I could see neighbors pretending not to watch while this family drama played out on our front porch. Don't worry about where you're going, Geraldine said, her voice sweet as antifreeze. I'm sure a resourceful woman like you will figure something out. You always were good at landing on your feet. The implication was clear. Even now, at my lowest moment, they couldn't resist twisting the knife. This is insane, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. You can't just kick us out. There are laws. Laws? Suzanne laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Dear, I spent all morning with our family lawyer. Everything is perfectly legal. Alonzo never updated his will after Gregory was born. The house, the business, everything reverts to the estate. And as his mother and closest living relative, I'm the executive. She pulled out a folded document from her purse, waving it like a weapon. It's all right here in black and white, signed, sealed, and witnessed. You have no claim to anything. My world tilted sideways. The rain was getting heavier now, drops bouncing off the porch steps and soaking our clothes. Grandma, please, Gregory tried again, his voice breaking. Dad wouldn't want this. He'd want us to stay together. For just a moment, Suzanne's expression softened. She reached out to touch Gregory's cheek, and I saw a glimpse of the grandmother who had once read him bedtime stories and baked him cookies. Oh, sweetheart, she said, her voice gentle for the first time all day. You don't have to go anywhere. This is your home, your birthright. You're a Washington. Gregory pulled away from her touch. If Mom can't stay, then I'm not staying either. The gentleness vanished from Suzanne's face like smoke. Don't be ridiculous, Gregory. She's not your real family. We are. We've been here since before you were born, and we'll be here long after she's moved on to her next husband. She is my real family, Gregory shouted, his teenage voice cracking with emotion. She's my mom. Blood is what matters in this family. Blood and loyalty. I felt something break inside me at those words. Not just my heart that had shattered the moment the doctors told me Alonzo was gone. This was something deeper. My faith in human decency, my belief that family meant more than genetics. Fine, I said quietly, picking up the trash bag of photos. We'll go. Suzanne nodded with satisfaction. Good. And Cheryl, don't come crawling back when reality hits. You have nothing now. Nothing. But as I stood there in the rain, watching the door of my home slam shut, something stirred deep in my chest. Not despair, I'd already felt that. Not anger, that would come later. This was something else entirely. Knowledge. Because what Suzanne and Geraldine didn't know, what made me smile through the tears streaming down my face, was that Alonzo had already left me everything. Now standing in the rain with my 15-year-old son, I remembered exactly where that envelope was hidden, and I was just getting started. The Hampton Inn smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. I sat on the edge of a queen bed that felt nothing like home, staring at the black trash bag Suzanne had thrown at my feet. Inside were random items they deemed mine. A few photos, some clothes, and Alonzo's watch, As if 17 years of marriage could fit in a garbage bag. Gregory emerged from the tiny bathroom, his hair still damp from the shower. He'd been quiet since we left the house. Too quiet for a teenager who usually filled every silence with questions or complaints. Mom. He sat beside me, the mattress dipping under his weight. Did Dad really not leave us anything? The question hit like a physical blow, not because it was cruel, but because it showed how thoroughly Suzanne and Geraldine had poisoned the well, how quickly they'd planted seeds of doubt in a grieving child's mind. Your father loved us, I said carefully. More than anything in this world. You know that, right? Gregory nodded, but his eyes held uncertainty. Then why did Grandma Suzanne say? Your grandmother says a lot of things. I reached into the trash bag and pulled out Alonzo's watch. The weight of it in my palm brought back 1,000 memories. But your father was smarter than she ever gave him credit for. I'd met Alonzo 20 years ago at a coffee shop near the college, where I was finishing my nursing degree. He was working construction then, building the new medical center. And he'd come in every morning at 6 a.m. sharp. He ordered black coffee and a blueberry muffin, and left a $5 tip on a $3 bill. The other girls thought he was showing off. I thought he was kind. You're wasting money, I'd finally told him one morning, unable to watch him overtip anymore. He'd smiled. That crooked grin that would become my favorite sight in the world. Maybe I'm investing in something. Coffee shop stocks. Conversation with the prettiest nurse-to-be I've ever seen. It was cheesy. It was perfect. It was Alonzo. 3 months later, he proposed with a ring he bought with construction wages and more of those generous tips. We married in a small ceremony that his mother barely tolerated, and his sister openly criticized. To them, I was never good enough. I wasn't from their social circle. I didn't have family money. I was just a nurse who'd trapped their golden boy. But Alonzo didn't care. He loved fiercely and completely. When Gregory was born, he cried harder than I did. When I wanted to go back to school for my master's, he worked overtime to make it possible. When his construction business grew into something real, something profitable, he made me his equal partner in everything. We're a team, he'd say, always. Now, sitting in a hotel room that cost $69 a night, I wondered if I'd imagined that partnership. If grief was making me remember things that weren't real. But then I remembered the envelope. 3 weeks before Alonzo died. When the pain was so bad he could barely speak, he'd grabbed my hand with surprising strength. Kitchen, he'd whispered. Behind the flour canister, when I'm gone. I'd thought he was delirious from the medication. The hospice nurse had warned me about confusion, about final conversations that didn't make sense. But Alonzo's eyes had been clear, determined. Promise me, he'd said. When I'm gone, check behind the flour canister. I'd promised, but in the chaos of funeral arrangements and grief, I'd forgotten. And then Suzanne and Geraldine had moved so quickly, had kicked us out so fast that I hadn't had time to remember. But I remembered now. Gregory, I said, standing up so quickly the watch fell from my palm. We need to go to the house. Mom, they'll call the police. Let them. I grabbed my purse and keys. It's still my house, at least until they can prove otherwise. The drive back took 12 minutes, long enough for doubt to creep in. What if Alonzo really hadn't left me anything? What if his final words were just morphine dreams? What if I was about to humiliate myself in front of his family, confirming everything they'd ever believed about me? The house looked different in daylight, colder. The flowers from the funeral still lined the driveway, wilted roses and lilies that had already started to brown at the edges. Someone had thrown away the sympathy cards that had been scattered on the porch. Suzanne's car wasn't in the driveway. Neither was Geraldine's. They're not home, Gregory observed. Good. This will be easier. I parked and turned off the engine. The spare key was still under the fake rock by the rose bushes. Alonzo had installed it when Gregory started walking home from school alone. Family should always be able to come home, he'd said. Family? The word tasted bitter now. Inside, the house felt like a crime scene. Furniture had been moved. Pictures had been taken down. In the living room, empty spots on the mantel showed where Alonzo's awards from the construction company had been displayed. His college diploma was gone from the hallway. Even the photo of our wedding day had been removed from the side table. They were erasing him. Erasing us. This is sick, Gregory muttered, staring at the blank walls. This is theft, I corrected. The kitchen looked normal but wrong. Someone had rearranged the spice rack, moved the coffee maker, changed the placement of the fruit bowl that had sat in the same spot for 15 years. But the flour canister was still there, tucked in its corner between the stove and the wall. My hands shook as I reached behind it. At first, I felt nothing but dust and the cool metal of the stove. Then my fingertips brushed something papery. An envelope taped to the back of the canister where no one would think to look. Mom. Gregory's voice seemed to come from far away. What is it? I pulled the envelope free and stared at Alonzo's handwriting on the front. For Cheryl, my heart, my partner, my everything. Inside were 3 sheets of legal paper folded carefully, and a small key I didn't recognize. The first page was a will. Not the simple document we'd signed together 5 years ago, but something new, something comprehensive, something that made my knees weak with relief and rage. I, Alonzo Marcus Washington, being of sound mind and body, do hereby leave all my worldly possessions, including but not limited to my home at 1247 Maple Street, my business Washington Construction LLC, and all bank accounts, investments and personal property, to my beloved wife Cheryl Marie Washington. Every word was clear, unarguable, but it was the second page that made me gasp. A letter in Alonzo's careful script. My darling Cheryl, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And I suspect my mother and sister have shown their true colors. I've watched them my whole life, waiting for me to fail, waiting for our marriage to crumble, waiting for their chance to swoop in and claim what they think belongs to them. They're wrong. Everything I built for you and Gregory. You're my family. You're my choice. You're my heart. The key in this envelope opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Box 247. Inside, you'll find copies of everything, plus some things that might surprise you. Things I discovered about my family that you need to know. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you all of this while I was alive. I was afraid it would hurt you. But now that I'm gone, you need the truth to protect yourself and our son. My mother and sister underestimated you and our entire marriage. They're about to learn that was their biggest mistake. Fight for what's ours, baby. Fight like hell. Oh, my love, Alonzo. I read the letter 2 times before the words fully sank in. Gregory peered over my shoulder, his eyes widening as he processed what this meant. Mom, he whispered. We own everything. We own everything. The sound of a car in the driveway cut through my shock. Through the kitchen window, I watched Suzanne's Mercedes pull up, followed by Geraldine's BMW. They were back. Quick, I told Gregory, folding the papers and slipping them into my purse. Let's go. But we were too late. The front door opened just as we reached the hallway. What the hell are you doing in my house? Suzanne's voice could have cut glass. I turned slowly, meeting her ice blue eyes with a steadiness that surprised us both. Your house? I asked quietly. You heard me. She stepped inside, Geraldine flanking her like a backup singer. I called the police. They're on their way. Good, I said. I'd like to file a report about stolen property. Suzanne laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. You can't steal what was never yours. You're right. I smiled, pulling out the will. You can't. The color drained from both women's faces as I unfolded the legal document. Their eyes darted across the page, reading and rereading words that couldn't be argued with or manipulated. This is fake, Geraldine whispered. Is it? I asked. Should we call Alonzo's lawyer and ask? Suzanne snatched the paper from my hands, studying it like she could will the words to change. Her face twisted with an emotion I'd never seen before. Not just anger, but genuine fear. He wouldn't do this, she said. He wouldn't cut out his own family. You cut yourselves out, I replied. The day you decided I wasn't family. The wail of sirens grew louder outside. 2 police cars had arrived just as Suzanne had promised. Ma'am. The first officer was young, polite, clearly uncomfortable with whatever domestic drama he'd been called into. We received a report of trespassing. Suzanne stepped forward, her mask of grief and wounded motherhood sliding perfectly into place. Officer, this woman is refusing to leave my son's home. My son passed away last week, and she's been living here illegally. That's interesting, I said calmly, handing the officer the will. Since my husband left me the house in his will. The officer read the document, his eyebrows raising. Ma'am, this appears to be legitimate. Do you have proof that contradicts this will? Suzanne's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Geraldine grabbed her arm, whispering frantically in her ear. There's obviously been some mistake, Geraldine said loudly. We'll need to have our lawyer examine this document. That's your right, I agreed. In the meantime, I'll be living in my house with my son. The officer looked between us, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. Ma'am, if this is a legitimate will, then Mrs. Washington has every right to be here. If you believe there's been fraud or forgery, you'll need to pursue that through civil court. This isn't over. Suzanne hissed as the officers headed back to their cars. No, I agreed. It's not. I watched them leave. Suzanne's Mercedes peeling out of the driveway with enough force to spray gravel across our lawn. Our lawn. Gregory stood beside me in the doorway, staring at the empty driveway. Mom, he said quietly. Are you scared? I thought about the question. 3 hours ago, I'd been a homeless widow with $30 in my checking account and no idea how to rebuild my life. Now I owned a house, a business, and apparently some surprises waiting in a safety deposit box. Was I scared? Terrified, but also something else. Furious. Yeah, baby, I said, putting my arm around his shoulders. But I'm more angry than scared. And your father always said angry could be useful if you pointed it in the right direction. What direction is that? I looked at the house we'd almost lost, then at the wilted funeral flowers still scattered across our driveway. Justice, I said. We're pointing it toward justice. First National Bank opened at 9 a.m. sharp. I was there at 8:45, standing in the parking lot with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, and nerves that felt like live wires under my skin. Gregory had wanted to come, but I'd convinced him to go to school instead. Try to have a normal day, I'd said, knowing there was nothing normal about our life anymore. The safety deposit box key felt heavy in my palm. Small and brass and holding promises I wasn't sure I wanted to keep. Alonzo's letter had mentioned surprises, things about his family I needed to know. 20 years of marriage and he'd been keeping secrets. Mrs. Washington, the bank manager, a soft-spoken woman named Bertha, led me into the vault area. I was so sorry to hear about Alonzo. Such a good man. Thank you. She inserted her key alongside mine, turning them simultaneously. The lock clicked open. I'll give you some privacy, Bertha said, sliding the long metal box from its slot. Take all the time you need. Alone in the small viewing room, I lifted the lid with trembling fingers. The first thing I saw was money. Not just bills, but stacks of hundreds bound with rubber bands, more cash than I'd ever seen in one place. Enough to live on for months, maybe years. Beneath the money were file folders, each labeled in Alonzo's careful handwriting. House deed, business documents, insurance policies, bank accounts, family secrets. That last folder made my stomach clench. I opened the house deed first, confirming what I already knew. The property was in both our names, but with right of survivorship. If one of us died, the other inherited everything automatically. No probate court, no family contests. The business documents were more complex. Washington Construction LLC was worth more than I'd realized. Much more. Contracts with the city. Partnerships with major developers. A company that could support Gregory through college and beyond. The insurance policies made me cry. Alonzo had increased his life insurance just 7 months before his diagnosis. Apparently sensing something was wrong before any of us knew. The payout was substantial, more than substantial. We weren't just secure. We were wealthy. But it was the final folder that changed everything. Family secrets contained bank statements going back 15 years. Not for accounts I recognized, but for something called the Washington Family Trust. Accounts that showed regular deposits from Alonzo's construction business. Deposits I'd never known about. Someone had been siphoning money from our company for over a decade. The statements showed withdrawals, too. Cash payments to creditors I didn't recognize. Payments for a house in Florida I'd never heard of. Payments for credit cards in names that made my blood run cold. Suzanne Washington, Geraldine Washington Price. They'd been stealing from us for years. But there was more. At the bottom of the folder was a private investigator's report dated just 2 months before Alonzo's death. Subject: Suzanne Washington and Geraldine Washington Price. Investigation type: financial fraud and asset recovery. The report was thorough and damning. Photos of Suzanne's Florida vacation home purchased with money stolen from Washington Construction. Credit card statements showing Geraldine's shopping sprees funded by unauthorized transfers from our business accounts. But the worst revelation was on page 12. A medical bill from a private clinic in Atlanta. Payment for plastic surgery for Geraldine. Paid for with money from our business. Money that should have gone toward Alonzo's cancer treatments. While my husband was dying, his sister was getting a nose job with funds stolen from the company he'd built. I sat back in the small chair, trying to process the scope of their betrayal. This wasn't just about kicking me out of the house. This was about years of theft, deception, and manipulation. My phone buzzed. A text from Gregory. How did it go? I looked at the evidence spread across the table. Bank statements, investigator reports, proof of systematic fraud that had been happening under my nose for over a decade. Better than expected, I typed back. See you at home. Home. For the first time since Alonzo died, the word felt real again. But first, I had a phone call to make. The law offices of Martinez, Chung, and Associates occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise. All glass and steel and expensive furniture that whispered competence. I'd chosen them based on their website's promise to fight for what's rightfully yours, but also because they were the firm that had handled several high-profile embezzlement cases in the past year. Colton Martinez was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of my story. He listened without interruption as I laid out the evidence from the safety deposit box, occasionally making notes in precise handwriting. Mrs. Washington, he said when I finished. What you're describing is systematic embezzlement on a significant scale. We're talking about felony theft charges. How significant? He flipped through the bank statements, doing quick calculations. Based on these documents, I'd estimate they've stolen close to $300,000 over the past 15 years. The number hit like a physical blow. $300,000. Money that could have paid for better cancer treatments. Money that could have sent Gregory to any college he wanted. Money that could have given us options when the medical bills started piling up. What are my options? I asked. Colton leaned back in his leather chair. Several, depending on how aggressive you want to be. We could start with civil recovery, sue them for the stolen funds plus damages, or we could go criminal and have them arrested for embezzlement and fraud. What would you recommend? Both. His smile was sharp. Sue them civilly to recover the money and file criminal charges to make sure they face consequences. People who steal from dying men shouldn't get to walk away with a slap on the wrist. I thought about Suzanne's cold voice throwing trash bags at my feet. About Geraldine's smug expression as she claimed I was just the wife. About years of subtle insults and deliberate exclusion from family gatherings. About Alonzo working himself into the ground while his own family robbed him blind. Both, I said firmly. Definitely both. Colton's grin widened. Now you're talking my language. But I should warn you, this is going to get ugly. They'll fight back. They'll say terrible things about you and Alonzo. They'll try to paint you as a gold digger who manipulated a dying man. Let them try. The words came out harder than I'd intended. They've been saying those things about me for 20 years. At least now I have evidence that they're the real thieves. There's one more thing, Colton said, pulling out a fresh legal pad. The private investigator's report mentions that your husband hired him to look into this theft. That suggests Alonzo knew what was happening before he died. So why didn't he confront them himself? Why did he leave it for you to discover? I thought about Alonzo's final weeks. The pain that kept him awake at night. The way he'd hold my hand and whisper apologies I didn't understand. He was protecting me, I realized. He knew they'd retaliate. He knew they'd try to destroy me if they thought I was a threat. But now you are a threat. Now I'm the only threat that matters. Colton nodded approvingly. I'll start drafting the paperwork immediately. We'll file civil suits against both women for embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. I'll also contact the district attorney's office about criminal charges. How long will this take? Civil cases can drag on for months or years. Criminal charges move faster, especially with evidence this clear. He gestured to the bank statements spread across his desk. I'd estimate we could have arrest warrants within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, the women who'd thrown me out of my own house would be answering to a judge for their crimes. Mr. Martinez, I said, standing to leave. I want you to know something. This isn't just about money. What's it about? I thought about Gregory's confused face as his grandmother slammed the door. About 17 years of marriage reduced to a trash bag full of random belongings. About a dying man who'd spent his final weeks trying to protect the family he'd chosen over the family he'd been born into. Justice, I said. It's about justice. The news hit the local paper on a Monday morning. Local construction company owners face embezzlement charges. The article was small, buried on page 6, but it might as well have been front-page headlines for the impact it had. My phone started ringing at 7 a.m. Cheryl, honey, what in the world is going on? My neighbor, Mrs. Dolores, sounded breathless with excitement. I can't really discuss the details, I said politely. It's in the hands of the lawyers now. But Mrs. Dolores wasn't the only caller. By noon, I'd fielded calls from 3 more neighbors, 2 of Alonzo's former employees, and a reporter from the local news station asking for comment. Gregory came home from school with wide eyes and nervous energy. Mom, everyone's talking about it, he said, dropping his backpack by the door. Kids at school are asking if Grandma Suzanne's really going to jail. What did you tell them? That I didn't know anything. He flopped onto the couch. Our couch. In our house. How do you feel about all this? I asked Gregory. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Angry, he said finally. Really, really angry. Dad was sick, Mom. He was dying, and they were stealing from him. Yeah, baby. They were. That's evil. The word hung in the air between us. Evil. Not just wrong or selfish or greedy. Evil. Maybe it was. My phone rang again. This time the caller ID made my stomach clench. Geraldine. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out over caution. Hello, Geraldine. You bastard. Her voice was pure venom. You vindictive, money-grubbing bastard. Gregory looked up sharply, hearing the rage even through the phone speaker. Is there something you wanted to discuss? I asked calmly. You know what you've done? Those lies you told the police. Those fake documents you forged. Which fake documents? I interrupted. The will that your brother signed in front of 2 witnesses, or the bank statements showing 15 years of theft. Silence. Then we took care of Alonzo his whole life. We supported him when he was struggling to get the business started. We deserved. You deserved nothing. The words came out sharp enough to cut. You stole from a dying man. You stole from his family. You stole from his son. That money was family money. No, Geraldine. That money was our money. Money Alonzo earned. Money I helped him earn. Money that should have gone toward his medical care instead of your plastic surgery. Another silence, longer this time. How did you? She started, then stopped. How did I find out about the nose job? About the vacation house in Florida? About the credit cards you've been maxing out with stolen funds? I smiled even though she couldn't see it. Your brother was smarter than you ever gave him credit for. He documented everything. You can't prove any of this. Actually, I can. Bank statements, credit card records, receipts from the plastic surgery clinic. Should I keep going? The line went dead. Gregory stared at me with something like awe. Mom, you were amazing. I was angry. Same thing right now. Maybe he was right. Maybe anger and strength were the same thing when everything you'd built was under attack. The next morning brought a certified letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. Perkins, Bailey & Sons. The letterhead screamed. Old money and established power. Dear Mrs. Washington, we represent Mrs. Suzanne Washington and Mrs. Geraldine Washington Price in the matter of the disputed will purportedly signed by the late Alonzo Washington. Our clients contest the validity of this document and demand that you cease all claims to property that rightfully belongs to the Washington family estate. Furthermore, the slanderous accusations you have made regarding alleged financial improprieties are completely without merit and constitute defamation of character. If you do not immediately retract these false statements and remove yourself from the property in question, we will have no choice but to pursue legal action for defamation, harassment, and fraud. We await your prompt response. I read the letter twice, then called Colton Martinez. They hired lawyers, I told him. Good ones, he said after I read him the letter. Perkins, Bailey & Sons handle a lot of high-end white-collar defense. They're expensive. Can they actually contest the will? They can try, but Alonzo's will was properly witnessed and notarized. It'll be very difficult to overturn. Colton paused. The more interesting question is where they got the money to hire Perkins, Bailey & Sons. Those guys charge $1,000 an hour. I hadn't thought about that. Suzanne worked part-time at a boutique. Geraldine was married to a middle manager at an insurance company. Neither of them should have been able to afford top-tier legal representation, unless they were still stealing. Colton, I said slowly, can you check whether there have been any new withdrawals from the business accounts? Any recent transfers I might not know about? I'll make some calls. But Cheryl, if they're using stolen money to pay lawyers to fight you in court, that's a whole new level of fraud. How new? Federal charges new. Wire fraud, money laundering, racketeering. We could be looking at serious prison time. The idea should have made me happy. Justice served, consequences delivered. But all I felt was tired. Bone deep. Soul tired from fighting people who should have been family. Do what you need to do, I told him. That afternoon, I took Gregory to visit Alonzo's grave. We hadn't been back since the funeral, and the headstone was finally in place. Simple granite with his name, dates, and the inscription we'd chosen together. Beloved husband and father. Dad would be proud of you, Gregory said, kneeling to pull weeds from around the base of the stone. You think so? I know so. You're fighting for us, for what he wanted us to have. I touched the smooth granite, still warm from the afternoon sun. Sometimes I wonder if he'd want me to just let it go. Take the high road. Forgive and forget. Gregory looked up at me with eyes that were older than 15 had any right to be. Mom, they stole from him while he was dying. They threw us out of our own house. They called you just the wife at his funeral. I know, but. There is no but. Gregory stood, brushing dirt from his knees. Dad left you everything because he knew this would happen. He knew they'd try to take it all away from us. He was protecting us even after he was gone. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best. We stood together in the late afternoon light, surrounded by flowers and memories and the weight of decisions that would shape our future. In the distance, I could see someone approaching through the cemetery. Suzanne. She walked slowly, like she was afraid or maybe like she was trying to decide whether to run away. Mom. Gregory tensed beside me. It's okay, I said softly. Let's see what she wants. Suzanne stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to talk, but far enough to maintain distance. She looked older than she had at the funeral. Smaller somehow. Cheryl, she said quietly. Suzanne. I came to see Alonzo. He's dead, Gregory said bluntly. You missed your chance to see him when it mattered. Suzanne flinched like she'd been slapped. Gregory, honey, I know you're angry. Don't call me honey. You threw me out of our own house. That was a mistake. I was grieving. I wasn't thinking clearly. You were thinking clearly enough to steal $300,000 from my father's business, Gregory shot back. I put a hand on his shoulder. My son was furious, and he had every right to be. But this conversation needed to happen between adults. What do you want, Suzanne? I asked. She looked at Alonzo's headstone, then back at me. I want to make this right. Which part? The stealing or the cruelty? All of it. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I want to make all of it right. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or deception. But all I saw was exhaustion, fear, maybe even genuine remorse. It's too late for that, I said finally. It doesn't have to be. I could pay back the money, drop the legal challenges to the will, apologize publicly for how I treated you, and in exchange, you drop the criminal charges. There was the real reason for this cemetery visit. Not grief or guilt or genuine remorse. Fear of going to prison. No, I said simply. Cheryl, please. I made mistakes, but I don't deserve to go to jail. I'm 72 years old. I couldn't survive prison. Gregory stepped closer to his grandmother, his voice low and dangerous. You want to know what Mom deserves? She deserves a husband who didn't have to worry about money while he was dying. She deserves to not have worked double shifts to pay for medical bills while you were getting plastic surgery with stolen money. She deserves family who actually acted like family. Suzanne's face crumpled. Gregory, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. My son's voice was still. You're only sorry because you got caught. He was right, and we all knew it. Susan looked at me one last time, her eyes pleading. Cheryl, I'm begging you. You begged me for nothing when you threw trash bags at my feet, I replied. You showed me exactly who you are, Suzanne. I'm just finally believing you. She turned and walked away without another word, her shoulders shaking with sobs that came 20 years too late. Gregory watched her go, then looked down at his father's grave. Dad would have forgiven her, wouldn't he? Probably. Are you going to? I thought about forgiveness, about turning the other cheek and taking the high road and all the things good people were supposed to do. Then I thought about Alonzo's final weeks, his whispered apologies for leaving us, his desperate attempts to make sure we'd be okay. Some things don't deserve forgiveness, I said finally. Some things deserve consequences. The call came at 6 a.m. on a Friday morning, jarring me awake from the first peaceful sleep I'd had in weeks. Mrs. Washington. This is Detective Sarah Chin with the Financial Crimes Unit. We need to talk. I sat up in bed, instantly alert. Is this about the embezzlement charges? It's about a lot more than that. Can you come to the station this morning and bring your lawyer? 2 hours later, Colton and I sat across from Detective Ahmad in a sterile interview room that smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams. Ahmad was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes and the kind of focused energy that suggested she'd been working this case around the clock. Mrs. Washington, she began, spreading files across the table. Your husband's private investigator was very thorough. The evidence you provided has opened up a much larger investigation. Larger? How? We've discovered that the Washington Family Trust wasn't just embezzling from your husband's construction business. They were also running a sophisticated money laundering operation. The words hit like a physical blow. Money laundering. That wasn't just theft. That was organized crime. Colton leaned forward. What kind of money laundering? Detective Ahmad opened one of the files. Drug money primarily. It appears that Mrs. Washington and Mrs. Washington Price were using the construction business as a front to clean cash from several mid-level drug dealers in the area. My mouth went dry. Alonzo didn't know about this. He couldn't have known. We don't think he did. All the evidence suggests your husband was an unwitting victim. The money laundering operation was run entirely by his mother and sister using his business accounts and reputation as cover. How much money are we talking about? Colton asked. Over the past 5 years, nearly $2 million. The number was so large it didn't seem real. $2 million in drug money washed clean through my husband's legitimate business, while he was fighting cancer. There's more. Detective Ahmad continued. We've been monitoring their communications since you filed the initial complaint. They've been planning to flee the country. What? She slid a transcript across the table. Phone conversations between Suzanne and Geraldine recorded just 2 days ago. Suzanne, the tickets are booked. Flight leaves Tuesday night. Geraldine, what about the lawyer? Perkins said he could drag this out for months. Suzanne, Perkins doesn't know about the other money. If they find that account in the Caymans, we're looking at federal charges. Geraldine, so we run. Suzanne, we run. I stared at the transcript, trying to process the scope of their betrayal. It wasn't just about stealing from Alonzo. They'd been using his business, his name, his reputation to launder money for drug dealers. And now they were planning to flee the country rather than face the consequences. Are you going to arrest them? I asked. We already have. Both women were taken into custody this morning on federal charges of money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy. They're being held without bail pending trial. The room seemed to spin around me. Arrested. Federal charges. No bail. It was over. Mrs. Washington. Detective Ahmed's voice seemed to come from far away. Are you all right? I think so. I looked up at her. What happens now? Now we build the case. We'll need your testimony about the embezzlement from the construction business. We'll also need access to all the company records going back 10 years. Whatever you need. Detective Ahmad smiled, the first warm expression I'd seen from her. You did good, Mrs. Washington. A lot of people would have just taken the money and walked away. You chose to fight for what was right. I chose to fight for my family. Same thing in this case. The news broke that afternoon. Not on page 6 this time, but as the lead story on every local news station. Local women arrested in multi-million-dollar money laundering scheme. My phone started ringing again, but this time the calls were different. Supportive, amazed. Several of Alonzo's former employees called to thank me for exposing what they'd always suspected was happening. We knew something was wrong, said Corey, who'd worked for Washington Construction for 8 years. Money would disappear from job sites. Supplies would go missing. But Alonzo was so trusting, especially when it came to his family. Gregory came home from school with a completely different energy than he'd had in weeks. Lighter somehow. Relieved. Everyone at school is calling you a hero, he said, grinning. I'm not a hero, I said. I'm just a widow who got tired of being pushed around. Same thing right now. Maybe he was right again. That evening, Colton called with an update on the civil case. With the federal charges, everything changes, he explained. The government will seize all assets connected to the money laundering operation. That includes the vacation house in Florida, the luxury cars, everything they bought with stolen money. What about the money they took from the business? Full restitution plus damages. You're looking at recovering not just the original $300,000, but probably closer to $500,000 after penalties and interest. $500,000. Enough to secure Gregory's future. Enough to expand the construction business. Enough to honor Alonzo's memory by building something lasting. There's one more thing, Colton said. The federal prosecutor wants to meet with you. They're considering offering you a chance to speak at the sentencing hearing. To say what? To tell the judge how their crimes affected you and Gregory. To make sure the court understands the human cost of what they did. I thought about that human cost. The nights I'd worked double shifts while Alonzo was sick, not knowing his own family was stealing money that could have helped with medical bills. The stress and worry about finances during his final weeks. The humiliation of being thrown out of my own home just days after his funeral. The way Gregory had looked when his grandmother called me, just the wife. Yes, I said. I want to speak at the sentencing. 3 weeks later, while cleaning out Alonzo's office in the basement, I found something that changed everything I thought I knew about my husband's final months. A journal hidden behind a loose baseboard that you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. Gregory was at school, and the house was quiet except for the sound of rain against the windows. I'd been putting off this task, going through Alonzo's personal papers, his desk drawers, the remnants of the life we'd built together. But with the criminal trial approaching and the civil case moving forward, I needed to gather any remaining business documents that might be relevant to the prosecution. That's when I found the loose baseboard, a small section behind his desk that shifted when I bumped it with the vacuum cleaner. Inside was a leather-bound journal, the kind with a small lock that anyone could open with a paper clip. The first entry was dated 8 months before Alonzo's death. May 15th. Something's wrong with the books. Money's missing from the equipment account, and I can't figure out where it went. Asked Mom about it and she got defensive. Said I was questioning her integrity, but numbers don't lie. May 20th. Found the Florida house online. Mom's been posting pictures on Facebook, bragging about her retirement investment. The down payment was exactly the amount missing from our equipment account. Coincidence? I don't think so. May 28th. Hired a private investigator. Jim Dolores recommended a guy who specializes in financial fraud. His name is David Reyes. I hate that it's come to this, but I have to protect Cheryl and Gregory. My hands shook as I turned the pages. Entry after entry documented Alonzo's growing awareness of his family's betrayal. His pain wasn't just physical. It was emotional, spiritual. The deep wound of discovering that the people he trusted most had been destroying everything he'd worked to build. June 15th. Got the first report from Reyes. It's worse than I thought. They've been stealing for years. Not just from the business, but they're involved with some really bad people. Drug dealers, money laundering. Things that could destroy everything Cheryl and I have built. I can't tell her. Not while I'm this sick. The stress would kill her, and she has enough to worry about with my treatment. June 30th. Saw Dr. Salvador today. The cancer is spreading faster than they expected. I might have weeks, not months. I have to make sure Cheryl and Gregory are protected. Updated my will today. Left everything to Cheryl as it should be. Mom and Geraldine have stolen enough. They'll get nothing from me. July 10th. Getting harder to write. Pain is bad today. But Reyes called with more evidence. Mom and Geraldine are planning something. He thinks they're going to make a move after I die. Try to claim the business and the house. I won't let that happen. I've hidden copies of everything where Cheryl will find them. The flour canister was her idea years ago. She said we should have a secret hiding place for important documents in case of fire or theft. She was more right than she knew. I had to stop reading. Tears were making the words blur together, and my chest felt tight with the weight of everything Alonzo had been carrying alone. He'd known for months. He'd known what his family was doing, and he'd borne that knowledge in silence to protect Gregory and me from the truth. The final entries were shorter. His handwriting shakier. July 15th. Very bad day. Can barely hold the pen. But Reyes brought the final report. Enough evidence to put them away for years. I'm hiding it all in the safety deposit box. Cheryl will find it when she's ready. She's stronger than she knows. Stronger than I ever was when it came to my family. July 25th. This might be my last entry. Getting hard to stay awake. But I want to write this down in case somehow she reads this journal. Cheryl, my beautiful wife, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've discovered the truth about my mother and sister. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I was afraid it would break your heart, and your heart had already been broken enough by watching me die. Fight them. Fight with everything you have. They will try to destroy you, to take everything we built together, to erase our love from the world. Don't let them. You are not just the wife. You are my partner, my equal, my heart walking around outside my body. You made me a better man than I ever deserved to be. Take care of Gregory. Teach him that family isn't about blood. It's about choice. We chose each other, the three of us. We chose love over greed, loyalty over selfishness, truth over convenience. I love you forever, Alonzo. I closed the journal and cried for the first time since the funeral. Not gentle tears, but huge, gasping sobs that came from the deepest part of my grief. I cried for the burden Alonzo had carried alone. I cried for the faith he'd had in my strength. I cried for the man who'd loved me enough to protect me even from beyond the grave. When Gregory came home from school, he found me still sitting in the basement office, the journal in my lap. Mom, what's wrong? I told him about the journal, about his father's final months, the investigation, the evidence he'd gathered while fighting cancer, and betrayal simultaneously. Gregory read the final entry twice, his face cycling through anger, sadness, and something that looked like pride. He really loved us, he said finally. He really did. Mom, we have to make sure everyone knows what kind of man he was, what he went through to protect us. How? Gregory looked up at me with eyes that were exactly like his father's. At the sentencing hearing, when you speak to the judge, tell them about the journal. Tell them Dad was a hero. The federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta was a monument to justice. All marble columns and soaring ceilings that made you feel small and significant at the same time. I'd never been inside a federal building before, but the weight of history and law pressed down like a physical thing. Suzanne and Geraldine sat at the defendant's table in orange jumpsuits, flanked by public defenders who'd replaced the expensive lawyers they could no longer afford. All their assets had been frozen pending the outcome of the trial, including the money they'd used to hire Perkins, Bailey, and Sons. They looked older, smaller. Suzanne's perfectly styled hair hung limp around her shoulders, and Geraldine's designer wardrobe had been replaced by standard-issue prison clothing. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Then I remembered the journal. The nights Alonzo had sat in his basement office, dying of cancer and discovering his family's betrayal. Too heartbroken to share the truth with the wife who was already watching him fade away. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Rebecca Nicholas, had prepared me for this moment. Your testimony is crucial, she'd explained during our prep session. The jury needs to understand that this wasn't just about money. These women destroyed a dying man's peace of mind. They used his love for family as a weapon against him. Now sitting in the witness box with my right hand raised, I faced 12 strangers who would decide whether justice would finally be served. Mrs. Washington, Rebecca began. Can you tell the court about your husband's final months? I'd practiced this testimony dozens of times, but nothing had prepared me for the reality of speaking these words aloud in front of Suzanne and Geraldine. Alonzo was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in March. I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. The doctors gave him 6 to 8 months. We spent those months fighting for more time, for better treatments, for hope. Were you aware that your husband had hired a private investigator during this time? No, I didn't learn about that until after he died. Rebecca approached the witness stand with a folder. I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit A, your husband's journal, discovered in his home office. Have you read this journal? Yes. Can you tell the court what you learned from reading it? I looked at Suzanne and Geraldine. They wouldn't meet my eyes. I learned that while I was taking care of my dying husband, his mother and sister were systematically stealing from our business. I learned that Alonzo discovered their theft months before he died, but he kept it secret because he didn't want to burden me with more stress. My voice cracked slightly. I learned that he spent his final weeks while fighting cancer, while in constant pain, gathering evidence to protect our son and me from people who were supposed to be family. How did this discovery make you feel? Colton had warned me about this question. Don't let emotion overwhelm the facts, he'd said. But don't be afraid to show the jury your humanity. Heartbroken, I said simply. My husband died believing he'd failed to protect us from his own family. He carried that burden alone because he loved us too much to share it. Rebecca nodded and moved to her next exhibit. Mrs. Washington, I'm showing you bank statements from the Washington Family Trust account. Do you recognize these? Yes. These show systematic withdrawals from our business accounts over a period of 15 years. Money that was stolen while we were struggling to pay medical bills, while we were working extra jobs to keep the business afloat. Can you estimate the total amount stolen? Including the money laundering operation, approximately $2 million. A murmur ran through the courtroom. $2 million was more money than most people would see in a lifetime. Mrs. Washington, how did this theft affect your family's ability to cope with your husband's illness? This was the hardest question, the one that cut closest to the bone. We had to choose between treatments, I said, looking directly at the jury. Experimental therapies that insurance wouldn't cover. Travel to specialists in other cities. We couldn't afford the best care, because we didn't know that money was being stolen from our business every month. Do you believe these stolen funds could have changed the outcome of your husband's treatment? The defense attorney objected, but the judge allowed me to answer. I'll never know, I said. But we should have had the choice. We should have been able to try everything, spend everything, fight with every resource we had. That choice was stolen from us. Rebecca's questioning continued for another hour, walking me through the embezzlement evidence, the money laundering operation, and the impact on Gregory and me. Then came cross-examination. The defense attorney was a tired-looking man who clearly didn't want to be there. His clients couldn't afford better representation, and he was doing his best with an impossible case. "Mrs. Washington," he began, "isn't it true that you and your husband lived quite comfortably despite these alleged thefts?" "We lived paycheck to paycheck," I replied. "We worked multiple jobs. We took out loans against the business to pay medical bills. But you owned a nice home, drove decent cars. We owned those things because we worked for them. Because we built a successful business that should have been much more successful if people hadn't been stealing from it." He tried a few more angles, suggesting that I was motivated by greed rather than justice, that I was exaggerating the impact of the theft, that Alonzo might have known about and approved the financial arrangements. Each suggestion felt like a slap, but I answered calmly, factually, letting the evidence speak for itself. Finally, he sat down. "Thank you, Mrs. Washington," the judge said. "You may step down." As I walked back to my seat, I glanced at Suzanne and Geraldine one more time. Suzanne was crying silently, her face buried in her hands. Geraldine stared straight ahead, her jaw set in defiance. Neither of them had shown a moment of remorse during my testimony. Neither had looked at me with anything resembling shame or regret. They were sorry they'd been caught, nothing more. The trial continued for 3 more days. The prosecution presented bank records, wiretapped phone conversations, testimony from drug dealers who'd used Washington Construction to launder money. The evidence was overwhelming. The defense tried to argue that Suzanne and Geraldine were victims themselves, manipulated by criminals in over their heads, acting out of desperation rather than greed. The jury didn't buy it. After deliberating for less than 4 hours, they returned guilty verdicts on all counts: money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy, and embezzlement. The morning of the sentencing hearing, I woke up before dawn with Alonzo's journal in my hands. I'd been reading it again, preparing for the victim impact statement that would help determine how long Suzanne and Geraldine would spend in federal prison. Gregory found me in the kitchen at 5 a.m., sitting with coffee and pages of handwritten notes. "You ready for this?" he asked, pouring himself a glass of orange juice. "I think so." I looked at my notes, bullet points about financial hardship, emotional trauma, the impact on our family. "It feels like the most important speech I'll ever give." "It is." Gregory sat across from me at the kitchen table, where we'd eaten thousands of meals as a family, where Alonzo had helped him with homework, where we'd planned birthdays and vacations and dreams. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think Dad would want them to go to prison?" The question had been haunting me for weeks. Alonzo had been a forgiving man, slow to anger, quick to see the best in people, even when those people were destroying everything he'd worked to build. "I think your father would want justice," I said finally. "Not revenge." "Justice? What's the difference?" "Revenge is about making them suffer because we suffered. Justice is about making sure they face consequences for their choices, so other people don't get hurt the same way." Gregory nodded thoughtfully. "So this isn't about us anymore. It's about the next family they might steal from." "Exactly." 2 hours later, we sat in the same federal courthouse where the trial had taken place. But today felt different, final. Like a book that was finally reaching its last chapter. Judge Bertha Morrison was a small woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see through every excuse, every justification, every attempt to minimize responsibility. She'd presided over the trial with fairness and authority, and I trusted her to deliver appropriate sentences. Suzanne and Geraldine sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller and more defeated than they had during the trial. Prison had not been kind to them. The prosecutor spoke first, summarizing the crimes and their impact. "Your Honor, these defendants didn't just steal money. They betrayed the deepest bonds of family trust. They used a dying man's love for his relatives as a weapon against him. They destroyed his peace of mind during his final months and left his widow and son financially vulnerable." Then it was my turn. I walked to the podium with Alonzo's journal in one hand and my prepared statement in the other. The courtroom was silent except for the whisper of air conditioning and the scratch of court reporter pens. "Your Honor," I began. "My name is Cheryl Washington, and I'm here to speak for my husband who can't speak for himself." I opened the journal to a page I'd marked with a yellow sticky note. 8 months before Alonzo died, he wrote these words. "I hate that it's come to this, but I have to protect Cheryl and Gregory." He was talking about hiring a private investigator to look into his own family's theft. I looked up at Suzanne and Geraldine. This time they were looking back. Imagine being so sick that you can barely hold a pen, and using what little energy you have to gather evidence against your mother and sister. Imagine loving your wife and son so much that you carry that burden alone rather than share it with people who are already watching you die. My voice got stronger as I continued. The defendants want this court to believe their victims, that they were in over their heads, that they made mistakes out of desperation. But desperation doesn't explain 15 years of systematic theft. Desperation doesn't explain using a dying man's business to launder money for drug dealers. I flipped to another page in the journal. 3 weeks before he died, my husband wrote, "Cheryl will find it when she's ready. She's stronger than she knows, stronger than I ever was when it came to my family." I closed the journal and looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, Alonzo was wrong about one thing. He wasn't weak when it came to his family. He was loving. He was loyal. He was generous to a fault. Those are good qualities in a man, but they're also qualities that predators can exploit. The defendants exploited my husband's love for 17 years. They stole his money, his peace of mind, and his ability to provide the best possible care for his family during his final illness. They did this knowingly, systematically, and without remorse." I paused, gathering myself for the final point. "I'm not here asking for revenge, Your Honor. I'm here asking for justice. Justice for Alonzo, who died carrying the weight of their betrayal. Justice for Gregory, who lost his father and then watched his grandmother throw him out of his own home. And justice for the next family these women might destroy if they're allowed to walk away from this without serious consequences." I returned to my seat, my hands shaking slightly from adrenaline and emotion. The defense attorneys spoke next, making their final pleas for leniency. They talked about Suzanne's age, about Geraldine's children, about the defendants' clean records before these crimes. They did not talk about remorse because there had been none. Finally, Judge Morrison asked if the defendants wanted to make statements before sentencing. Suzanne stood first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your Honor, I want to say that I'm sorry. I know I made terrible mistakes, and I know I hurt people I love. I'm asking for your mercy." It was too little, too late, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. Geraldine's statement was even shorter. "I'm sorry for my part in this, Your Honor. I hope the court will consider that I have young children who need their mother." Judge Morrison listened without expression, then spent several minutes reviewing the case files. When she looked up, her voice carried the weight of federal authority. "Mrs. Washington, Mrs. Price, you have been convicted of serious federal crimes that destroyed not just your family relationships, but endangered your community through money laundering activities." She turned to Suzanne first. "Mrs. Washington, you orchestrated a 15-year campaign of theft against your own son while he was building a business and raising a family. When he became terminally ill, rather than supporting him, you used his illness as an opportunity to steal even more aggressively. You violated every bond of trust that should exist between family members. For your crimes, I sentence you to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You will also pay full restitution in the amount of $2.1 million. Suzanne collapsed back into her chair, sobbing. Judge Morrison turned to Geraldine. "Mrs. Price, you were an active participant in this conspiracy from the beginning. You helped launder money for drug dealers, putting your entire community at risk. You showed no remorse during this process, and attempted to flee the country rather than face responsibility for your actions. I sentence you to 10 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release and full restitution in the amount of $2.1 million. Geraldine's face went white, but she didn't cry. She just stared straight ahead as the bailiffs approached to lead them away. As they were escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs, Suzanne looked at me one final time. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. I think she was trying to say, "I'm sorry, but some apologies come too late to matter. The construction business is thriving." With the stolen money recovered and the criminal element removed, Washington Construction has expanded into 3 new markets and employed twice as many people as it did when Alonzo was alive. Gregory is a senior in high school now, talking about studying business in college, so he can help run his father's company. He's grown 3 inches this year, and looks more like Alonzo every day. Not just physically, but in his quiet strength and natural kindness. "Dad would be proud of what we've built," he said last week, reviewing the company's quarterly reports. "We built it together," I reminded him. "All 3 of us. The house feels like home again. We've redecorated some rooms, added new family photos, planted a garden in Alonzo's memory, but the kitchen table is still in the same place, and Gregory still does his homework there while I cook dinner. Some things shouldn't change. I visit Alonzo's grave every Sunday after church. usually bringing fresh flowers and updates about our life. This week, I brought news about Suzanne and Geraldine. They lost their appeals. I told the granite headstone that bears his name. Suzanne's in a federal prison in Kentucky. Geraldine's in Florida. They won't be eligible for parole for at least 8 years. I knelt to pull weeds from around the base of the stone. I used to think you'd want me to forgive them, I continued. But I realized something. Forgiveness isn't about them. It's about me. And I can forgive them for my own peace of mind while still believing they deserved consequences for what they did to you, to us. The afternoon sun was warm on my back as I arranged the fresh flowers. White roses because they were Alonzo's favorites. Gregory is going to graduate with honors, I said. Full scholarship to Georgia Tech for business school. He wants to study construction management and finance. Says he's going to make sure no one ever steals from the family business again. I smiled, imagining Alonzo's reaction to that news. He's got your heart, baby, your sense of justice, but he's also got my spine when it comes to protecting what we've built. A car door slammed in the parking lot behind me, and I turned to see Gregory walking across the cemetery with a bouquet of sunflowers. Thought I'd find you here, he said, kneeling beside me. How was your college interview? Good. Really good. He placed the sunflowers next to my roses. They asked me about the family business, about what happened with Grandma Suzanne and Aunt Geraldine. What did you tell them? Gregory was quiet for a moment, looking at his father's name carved in granite. I told them that family isn't about blood, he said finally. It's about choice. And my parents chose to build something good together, something that would last beyond their own lives. And I choose to continue what they started not because I have to, but because I want to. Because that's what family does. We sat together in comfortable silence, surrounded by flowers and memories and the weight of decisions that had shaped our future. In the distance, other families tended other graves, other stories of love and loss, and the complicated mathematics of human relationships. We were Washingtons. We chose loyalty over convenience, truth over comfort, justice over easy peace. We chose each other. And in the end, that choice had been worth fighting. Years later, the Washington construction empire stood stronger than ever, a testament to Alonzo's vision and Cheryl's unwavering resolve. Gregory, now a confident young man with his father's keen business sense and his mother's tenacity, was at the helm, having graduated top of his class. He had not only expanded the company's reach, but also established a foundation in Alonzo's name, providing scholarships for aspiring tradespeople and supporting cancer research. Cheryl, stepping back from the day-to-day operations, found peace in mentoring young women in business, sharing her story of resilience and the power of choosing your own family. The house, filled with laughter and new memories, remained their sanctuary, a vibrant home where Alonzo's spirit lived on not in blood, but in the enduring love and strength of the family he had chosen.